right, so in section 4, we're still talking about quadratic equations. It says a quadratic equation will have either blank, blank, or blank solutions. And here's the premise. Just to kind of kick off what we're talking about. A quadratic equation is a parabola. So I'm going to draw you 3 parabolas here. Here we have a red parabola. Comes down, like so. Here we have our blue parabola. Comes down, touches, and goes back up. And then here's our black parabola. Comes down, and it doesn't touch at all. Now, a solution is where the parabola crosses the x-axis. So on the red one, where does it cross the x-axis? Right there and right there. So how many solutions does it have? 2. On the blue one, how many times does it cross? Once. It just comes down and touches. And the black one? 0. So to answer this, a quadratic equation can have either, what options? 2, 1, or 0 solutions, okay? Either 2, 1, or 0 solutions. All right, looking down, it says, notice, if there's no b term in the ax squared plus bx plus c equation, you can solve it very simply by following the steps below. We isolate the x squared term, then we divide by a, we take the square root of both sides, and remember when you take the square root of both sides, I'm going to teach you have 2 possible answers. Okay? So, these are all examples of equations that I can make into parabolas, but I've set them up very simply. Here we have our very first one, m squared equals 16. Well, the m squared is by itself, and so to solve this, there's a very simple step we do. To get rid of a square, we take the square root. And if you take the square root of the left side, Brett, you also have to be equal and take the square root of the right side. Now, when you take the square root of both sides, probably the most important thing to remember here today. What does a parabola look like? Remember, it's a U, okay? And in general, the parabola is going to cross how many times? In general, you think? Probably twice. When you take the square root of both sides, you're going to have 2 answers. What times itself equals 16? 4. What else times itself equals 16? Negative 4. So both negative 4 and positive 4 are what m can be equal to. When you take the square root of both sides, remember there's 2 answers. One's a positive, one's a negative. And you just got to think to yourself logically, Ryan, and that should make sense. So let's look at this next one. X squared equals 100. We take the square root of the x squared. We take the square root of 100. And when you take the square root of both sides, I'll say it again, you have 2 answers, a plus or a minus. And so my answer is x equals plus or minus 10. Now I've written my answers on both of those problems a little bit differently. The one on the left, I'm going to put brackets around, and that's called set notation. The one on the right is more of an expedient method. It's just putting plus or minus 10, but they mean the same thing. Notice on the left side, in set notation, which number came first? The negative. Okay, we still write them in the correct order. Either one would be appropriate manner in which to write your answer. I'm just showing you different ways. Sometimes the book will write it one way or another way. Now, moving down to 2a and 2b. What's different about them? What do you notice that's different, Justin, on 2a and 2b versus 1a and 1b? Okay, they have equal 0. Okay, so the idea is they're not equaling a number, they're equaling 0. So before you take the square root of both sides, Luke, what you've got to do is you've got to get the x squared by itself. It's not. Okay, we have this minus 21 attached to it. So to get rid of the minus 121, how are you going to get rid of that? Add it. So move it over. So put a plus 121 under each side. Plus 121, plus 121. Now we have x squared equals 121. Is the x squared isolated? You bet it is. So now you can take, Noah, your square root of both sides. So go ahead and take your square root of both sides. Square root of x squared, square root of 121. When you take the square root of both sides, don't forget about that plus or minus. And what are my answers? I have two of them. Plus 11 and negative 11. Nice job, Grace. Okay? Plus 11 and negative 11. Well, answer the question to yourself. Does 11 times 11 equal 121? Does negative 11 times negative 11 equal 121? So we want all the answers that satisfy this. And so whenever you have the square root of both sides, you're going to have both a positive and a negative as your possible answers. So you have to think, what does square root mean? It means what times itself equals the number inside. Little review. The number inside the radical sign, what's the special name for it? We talked about unwrapping a piece of candy. You remember that? It's called the radicand. Ring a bell? Might be a good word to remember, just as a common idea. All right, a squared plus 25 equals 0. Once again, Justin, we don't have the a squared by itself, so how do I get rid of that plus 25? Subtract it from both sides. All right, so everybody subtract it from both sides. A squared equals negative 25. Second step, Kyle, to get rid of the squared, take the what? Take that square root of both sides, right?
Yeah.
Okay? So the square root of a squared and the square root of negative 25. Now, Kyle just said we got to do the plus or minus, and that's right. So here's my question. What times itself equals negative 25? Think back. John's shaking his head no. Why? Nothing. Do you remember a couple sections ago? We did the square root of negative numbers. What did we write down? No solution, and we stuck a word in there. Not just no solution, but no real solution. Because there's no number that we know at the present time that will work. So when you take the square root of a number and the number inside is negative, it's got to be inside, then you have no real solution. Katie?
Why didn't you just say 5?
Well, let's try it. Any answer we get, we should be able to plug it back in and it work. So let's try 5. What's 5 squared? What's 25 plus 25? So that doesn't equal 0. So anything you get as an answer, I really didn't show you and talk about the check, but any answer we get, we should be able to plug it back to the original problem, and it should work. For example, look at 2a. Let's take the 11 there. What's 11 squared? Minus 121. Does it work? You bet. Let's go up here. Take negative 4. What's negative 4 times negative 4? 16, so it works. So any one of our answers has to be able to be plugged back in, and it works. That's why 5 or negative 5 don't work there. And that's our check. Now, we're not doing the check on these, but that's what you would do to check any equation, just like we talked about just with normal stuff. All right, flip her over. Let's take a look at the other side. I just want to show you all the different potential scenarios. Remember, our goal as we start these problems, Hannah, is to get the x squared, or the a squared, or the n squared all by itself. Now, on this one, we've got a lot of stuff attached to it. I've got a minus 27, and I've got a 3. So we've got to kind of unwrap the problem to get the x squared by itself. What do you think is easier to do and get rid of first, the minus 27 or the 3? I would get rid of the minus 27 because it's tacked on with adding and subtracting. So let's just add that over. So do a plus 27 on both sides. And there, Luke, we have 3x squared equals 27. Now, how is that 3 connected to the x squared? With what operation? So what's the opposite of multiplication? Division. All right? So the opposite of that multiplying, that connecting step, is division. So let's take that 3x squared and divide by 3. Take the 27 and divide by 3. Now I have x squared equals 9. Now I have a problem like what I had on the first page. Is the x squared isolated? Now we take the square root of both sides. Question or just stretching? All right. So let's take the square root of both sides. Square root of x squared, square root of 9. Remember, when you take the square root of both sides, since I took 2 square roots, I have how many answers? 2. So put your plus or minus there. And so x equals plus or minus 3. So, strategically, isolate the x squared by doing the adding and subtracting first, dividing second, then taking your square roots. All right, last one, 3b. First step, what do you think? Add the 40. So add the 40. 4a squared equals 49. Next step, Jalon? Divide by 4, good. So a squared equals 49 over 4. Little review. When you take the square root of both sides, once again, I know I say this every time, it's a plus or minus. How do you take the square root of a fraction without a calculator? Drew?
Take the top, square root of the bottom.
Right, take the square root of the top and the square root of the bottom. So Drew, the square root of 49 is?
7.
And the square root of 4 is? 2. So my answer is plus or minus 7/2. Try to stay away from using a calculator if you can avoid it. All right, now a little application down here at the bottom. It says find the radius of a circle with the area 154 inches squared. Round your answer to the nearest inch. So we're probably going to need our calculators. If you don't have yours out, get it out. Some key words here. I see the word area. I see the word circle. Do you remember the formula for the area of a circle? It's a pretty simple formula. What is that formula? Abby? You sure may. It is. It's pi times something. Pi times radius squared. Pi times radius again. Pi r squared. So it says the area is 154 inches. So let's replace the A with 154. Do anybody know an estimation for pi? 3.14. So let's replace that pi with that estimation. If you didn't know it, it's up there on the board. And now this is a more realistic problem like we have up on right above at 3x squared equals 27. Here we have 3.14 r squared equals 154. How am I going to get rid of the 3.14? Well, it's connected with multiplication. So good, yeah, we divide it. So take your calculator, divide 3.14 into 154. And that's going to give you some 49.04.
Yeah.
Now don't get rid of the decimals yet. Reminder, when do we round? We round at the end. How do you get rid of the squared part? Take the square root. What do you remember about square roots? What's the other way to do a square root on your calculator? Do you remember that idea? We take it and we raise it to the power of 1/2. So if you raise it to the power of 1/2, we get 7.003. Now here's a case, why didn't I even write down the negative? Why did I just throw out the negative and not even consider it? What are we talking about here? Area, radius, the distance. Can you have negative distance? So while it's one of our viable answers, we throw it out and we don't use it. So my answer, it says round your answer to the nearest inch. I guess I would say 7 inches. Do I say squared? No. Okay, because we got rid of the square by taking that square root, like Grace said. So just 7 inches. But you got to put inches down there. You got to give your units of measure and go from there. So very realistic problem there in terms of area, and that's where you're going to use a lot of stuff with regards to squares. Okay? All right, sliding down here. Not written on here, but we do have a practice quiz coming up. You guys know we have a 4-day week this week? So we have 10.2 to 10.4. The practice quiz, looking in your notes, is on page, let's see, page 37. Okay? So let's work on that tonight as well as the normal homework stuff.